This experience for me has been one that has just been wonderful. I've been sitting here, maybe you've heard me ask questions, but inside, I've felt so much less alone. Because even though I believe deeply in the work I do, I'm surrounded by other psychologists who are sort of doing fine-grained analysis of things that I stopped caring about a long time ago. My passion now is finding environments where the best things come out of children and where you see stuff like this instead of the stuff that so often occurs in schools. My job now in creating a pipeline for little children all the way to the time they get to be 22 and through college, not just to college, but through college, is to use the best we can find. And I think that I've been scouring the country, America, and a little bit in other countries to find the best schools where you walk in and you know within 10 seconds, this is where I want my kid. I think we're endowed with great antenna for what is good for children and what isn't. Evolutionarily, we would not put our kid in a dangerous place unless there was something wrong with us. And what I've learned is confirmed by hundreds of people that I ask the same question to. How long does it take you upon entering a school to decide whether you'd want a child of yours or a child that you love to be there? And it's, I never hear anything more than a minute or two. That's how fast it takes. And most of the children we know don't go to schools in the kind of schools that we would want our kids in. And in fact, the key to so much school improvement is empathy. It's empathy. It's the best schools I've found, and they're different in ways you cannot even imagine. I've been to schools where, private schools, where kids are being expertly prepared for the 19th century. I've been to, they're called Waldorf schools, and they're amazing. You'd want your own kid in this school. You know why? You do things in ways that they used to do them in. There's no technology. Kids learn to speak German, which is not that useful right now. But in the 19th century, that would have been a great thing. Schools where kids do whatever they want all day long and turn out great. And schools where it takes your breath away how good children can be to each other. And in trying to figure out how to sort of introduce that to you, in each of these schools, you know, within minutes, this is good for my kid. Bad schools, which are claiming to be able to make children nicer, smarter, and happier, are often operating on the wrong premises about human nature. And the thing that would save those schools is the thing that doesn't happen. People in charge putting their own children inside them. So David Levin, who's a friend of mine, I teach a course called The Achievement Gap at NYU. It's all about the rich-poor gap, all about the black-white gap, girls in math and science. And I invite people to come in, famous people. And one of the people I invited in was a guy named David Levin, who started a charter school system called the KIPP schools. And KIPP schools promise to take your young African-American child and turn them into a high achiever, and by God, in many cases, they do it. Top score, they get good test scores and good grades. But you walk in, and you would never want your own kid in a school like this. I dare say you would not want your own child talked to as though they were a criminal in the making. Stand up straight, tuck in your shirt. Are you sure that you want to ask that question? You only get 2 questions to ask. Are you sure you want to waste that on that question that you just asked? That kind of thing. One of my students asked David Levin, where do your kids go to school? And he said, Montessori. And we laid into him, why would you build a school for other people's children that treats them like subhumans? Why? Because it's for other people's children. And so I will not stop harassing him about that. One of the take-home points I want to make today is it's about rats. When most of people think of a rat, going back to the question, do you like rats? Big question. You do. Do you like this rat? This is the most famous rat. Hopefully, Bart's rats will get a little more famous, because currently this is the center of the rat universe. This is the rat that people YouTubed taking a piece of pizza in a subway down upstairs, and people were both horrified and intrigued by this. Or we often see rats in this context. Here we're maligning two groups, women and rats, but it's a stereotype of rats. So my point to you is that we construct situations for 98% of the students that I've met that are like this with rats. However, there are other ways to see rats, as we learned yesterday. These rats not only have affectionate relationship, I cannot get this picture out of my mind. That is so beautiful to me. And one of the reasons I couldn't sleep well last night is I kept thinking about this picture. And I was thinking how amazing that he provided such a beautiful representation of the way you can get the wrong impression of an animal, an entire species, because we always find them in the worst situations. We do this with children. We build schools that bring out the worst in them, and then we say, what's wrong with kids? When you think of a poor kid, when you think of a kid living in poverty in America, at least, in the inner city, these are the images that come to mind. And so policymakers often start here when they think about solving the problems of youth. They should start somewhere else. We have been complaining about youth for a long time, and it's left us scratching our heads, in America at least. I don't know about Canada. I think you're smarter than we are. Just comparing presidents. Just on that basis alone. How do we educate poor kids? How do we do it? The fact of the matter, according to this person, David Denby, one of my favorite writers, is we don't know. We don't know. Douglas Besheroff, a famous sociologist, says the cupboard is bare. Rich and poor are moving farther apart, and we don't know what to do about it. And we keep complaining about kids, that something's wrong with the kids. And this is nothing new. We've been complaining about kids these days since the old days. That's just what we do. And I would argue that we keep complaining about children because we keep arranging situations that bring out the worst in them, that make them gobble their food and talk back to their elders. It is certainly true that we are stuck in America, and it's interesting that we're stuck because we've been trying pretty much everything to get unstuck. And yet, what we've used is a theory of how students operate and learn that is completely flawed and brings out the worst in them. As in America, our test scores went down as a result of our trying to make them go up. Again, we're not as smart as you. One thing I want to say about this is that we're not just failing in terms of test scores, we're failing in terms of what I think schools' purpose should be, which schools actually do, because any place you put a child is doing this, is that they're in the business of people making. They think they're in the business of educating, but For better or worse, they are in the business of creating human beings. And we're not doing so well. When we only look at academic achievement, we're doing badly enough, but because we only look at academic achievement, by and large, we're doing terribly when you think about it. Think about this young man. I did a lot of thinking about this young man because he's the Newtown shooter, and he killed a kid that I know and a kid that I loved. And so I got very curious about why. One of the striking things that I learned about Adam Lanza was that if you just looked at school records, he was an exemplary school student, because that's what we do. We look at test scores and grades, and by that measure, this was a good student. They failed this child in the art of people-making. This guy stole a lot of money from people I know. His name is Bernard Madoff. But if you had looked at his high school transcript, you would have seen a person of great intelligence, obviously. Academic achievement is not enough. And this is Anthony Weiner. What can we say about Anthony Weiner that hasn't been said? Well, I can say one thing. You would be incredibly impressed by the size of his SAT score. His self-control score, not so much. Americans are exceptional. Even though we're middle of the pack in terms of academic achievement, we're number one in terms of, our teens are, binge drinking, marijuana use, unwanted pregnancy, sexually transmitted disease, abortion, obesity, unhappiness, violence, murder, and incarceration. We incarcerate more of our young than most countries do put together. American exceptionalism. This is very personal for me because I started working with young kids in New Haven, and I fell in love with several of them, mostly this one. He was smart as can be, as sweet as can be, as creative as can be, and he taught me how to meditate. And it was one of the most profound experiences to have a child teach you how to meditate. It's very much in keeping with this paradigm, isn't it? Children can teach us the most important things. And what he's teaching me, in addition to how to meditate, is how messed up society is with regard to child development. Our society, at least. So every time I go back to New Haven, Connecticut is a rough town. If you're a child in New Haven, you're going to sleep less because in the middle of the night you will hear gunshots in certain neighborhoods. Every time a kid hears a gunshot in the night, this is actual research in the south side of Chicago, some kids have to take tests the next day, and some sociologists have looked at their test scores and correlated them with the homicide. Homicide happens, it's not far away from where you live, your test score drops by a half a standard deviation, so you become stupider because of where you live. He's teaching me that. He's motivating my work, and it's really sad because every time I go back, he's a little bigger, his face shows signs of stress and the environment he lives in, and the meditation program that is keeping his humanity alive is hanging by a thread financially. And it breaks my heart. Because in a couple of years, so this is how it works. I'm partly a developmental psychologist. In a couple of years, you go into the kindergarten classes, everybody's cute. Empathy is 100% for cute children. They can do wrong stuff, you forgive them because they're cute. Then they get a little older, and some of the kids start losing their cuteness. And so the forgiveness abates a little bit. And you can tell when you're being forgiven and empathized with. That for white children. For black children, something else happens. He will begin to look 3 years older to the average person, and he will look like a criminal, and his teachers will even feel slightly menaced by him, because the stereotypes of our society mark him as a rat. A rat in many cases, will get more respect than this child when he grows up. Right now, he's cute, he's meditating, he's doing well in school, but I've seen it happen hundreds of times. And we have very little going on to save him The really good stuff is all optional, like the meditation. So what's wrong with America? What do we need to do to improve? Well, let's ask some of the experts. This is Joel Klein, who ran the schools in New York City for a while. He was a businessman. He was not a child educator. And he just was tired of all the excuse making that people were making. And if we could just stop making excuses, our kids' test scores would rise. He was fired. Teacher quality is all important. This is Michelle Rhee. She ran the schools in Washington, D.C., and when she was in charge, she taught for 2 years, and apparently she was not a good teacher, so she moved up to where she could run teachers' lives. That's how it works often. She said, if you just fire the bottom 20%, test scores will go up. And you know what? She was right. But it turned out that when teachers are threatened with firing for getting low test scores, many of them will start cheating for their students. Important lesson. The test scores went up for all the wrong reasons. The learning didn't go up, but the moral decay increased. Bill Maher, smart guy, not a scientist, but he read a study, and the study said that parents are really important, and they are important. Nothing is all important. Some of the best schools I've worked in have the worst parents you'd ever want to meet. In fact, it helps the child to keep the parent away from the school. So it's not all parents, but he thinks so. Charles Murray, who thinks that intelligence is the key. And the reason we can't improve is that we've milked all the IQ out of the environment. We're as smart as we're ever going to get, and half of us just aren't smart enough to make it in this new economy. Now, importantly, Charles Murray is not wrong about the fact that lots of people have not kept up with the new economy, and I think that's a big driver behind Brexit, Trump, is that people feel left behind in this new economy. And I disagree that it's all about IQ, but I do think it's a lot about education and what we're doing wrong. Friend of mine, Angela Duckworth, believes that the answer to our prayers is grit, this persistence towards long-term goals. And I've watched her. I've been in schools with her. We've been called into panels together, and she says, you guys just need more grit. You need to take a pill that has grit in it, a gritamin of sorts. That's how they understand children, is that there's this one characteristic that pops out in an equation, and so let's do that. And let me tell you something. You tell a kid who hasn't had enough to eat, who needs glasses, whose parents are fighting, who's witnessed a murder, that they don't have enough grit, and you are just a bad character in a bad dream that that kid is having. You are not helping that child at all. Just try harder. That's not very empathetic. And one of my mentors, who we developed the growth mindset together, something happens to people when they write a book, particularly a book with a one-word title in it. Mindset, grit, love. It gives the impression that there's one little thing you have to do and everything is going to be fine. And I think these people do sometimes more harm than good. Because it's never one thing with human beings. It's always very complicated. And that makes it not only harder, but more interesting. To walk into a school and say, you need grit or a growth mindset or for your parents to be more involved is to not be very curious about what's making kids underperform. And I think curiosity is the holy savior of our educational system. If our kids were more curious, they would like the work more. If our adults were more curious, they'd understand the kids better. If our politicians were more curious, they'd think about policies that actually work rather than ones that sell. For every complex problem, there's an answer that is simple and neat, and it is always wrong. So, the approach that social psychology bequeaths upon us is the situation, the context. The context. There's a context in which rats are a scourge. There is a context in which rats are our best friends. To learn from that, the deep lesson, and apply it to children is going to be the next 15 years of my life. All the things that we prize in children, intelligence, curiosity, grit, teacher quality, parent quality, all of those things are context dependent, and I'm going to show you why. Each is fragile, each is malleable, it can grow, but it needs to be protected. These holy pillars of achievement, they need protection. So in one of my roles, I'm an intelligence researcher, and I've studied intelligence from lots of angles, mainly for the first 20 years of my career, how do you crush intelligence in children? I'm doing penance now for it. I'm trying to build intelligence among children. But there's a couple of really important generalizations that we didn't know 20, 25 years ago. One, IQ performance is fragile. For example, if you get your kid IQ tested and they're not 18 or so, don't believe the results. Use the results to feed the information, but do not think that this kid is this smart and won't ever be smarter. It doesn't work that way. In fact, IQ test performance is very volatile until age 17. To make anything but helpful decisions based on it is a mistake. Sorry, Charles Murray. IQ performance is malleable. There are so many studies showing that you do a little thing, make a kid more comfortable, make a kid more curious, and their IQ scores goes up. One of my heroes in the field was a guy who was the scientist behind Head Start, Edward Zigler. Ed Zigler used to do studies where he'd IQ test poor children, bring them into the lab, white lab coat, give them a test. Sometimes, however, they played with the kid for 5 minutes. They did a puzzle with them before they went on to the IQ test. Those kids got IQ scores 10 points higher than the other ones. Why? They felt comfortable. This stranger, white lab coat wasn't sticking a dipstick into their brain. It was a friend of theirs who was doing puzzles with them. The context made these kids smarter. For a long time, we've been trying to make kids smarter, nicer, happier. That's been secondary, but smarter. We take poor kids, put them in an enriched environment for a couple of years, and then watch as their life unfolds in a better way than it would have. The problem is that most of these things are very expensive, and they fade after a couple of years, so that the control group catches up with the intervention group so that they're indistinguishable. And so people like James Heckman, who was mentioned earlier, often say these things are not useful because they fade. That's not quite true, because even a kid with a faded, boosted IQ score will go on to do better things. The score is not the most important thing, it's their life outcome. Nonetheless, it is problematic that we think of children as people we can give a vitamin to and then send them on their way. What is never done in these interventions, and what I think that this collective would understand, is that what a child needs is not just a shot in the arm. They need a loving community that stays with them, that white rich kids get. They get a loving community that takes them through life. You know how you can predict whether a kid will be successful or not? Well, there's lots of ways. Count the number of powerful people in love with that child. The number of powerful people in love with that child. Many of the people I know are very much in love with their children, want to do the right thing by them, but they're not powerful. You need powerful people in love with you. And one of the things I do in my pipeline is I bring people together in a context where the children are so lovely that wealthy adults fall in love with them and say, I cannot let that child go through life without my protection. But usually we put kids, again, in situations that don't bring out their loveliness. And so that kind of connection is not possible. I'm going to try and, I think you all have sort of ended that in many of your contexts. You bring out the natural loveliness of children, people attach to them, it changes their brain, according to Dan Siegel, and we all become better for it, and we don't ever want to turn our backs on those kids again. Now, IQ is very fragile. We know of all the physical things that you can do to a child to lower their IQ and ruin them for life. It's happening now in Flint, Michigan right now. Kids are drinking lead in their water. We know about toxic stress. I saw Shonkoff's name up here. He's very important in this. Trauma. 40 to 60% of the kids I work with, white, black, poor,
traumatized by what they've seen in their neighborhoods and their home. A traumatized child cannot learn the way a comfortable, a child in well-being can learn. That is not a complicated, it doesn't take much to understand that. There's also social factors. You'll notice that all of the things in this column are much more likely to happen to a poor child than a wealthy child. But so are these things. Social exclusion. In fact, poverty is just, in many ways, another name for social exclusion. Fear. Poor children often live in fear. Mistrust. That little boy that I fell in love with, I could take care of him, but his mother does not trust white people. She's never met me. I'm offering him a full ride. I'll protect him until he gets to NYU, and then I'll protect him when he's in NYU. Mother doesn't want to even consider such a thing from a white person. The thing that I've made my career on, called identity threat, which is the worry that you or somebody like you, that people like you, will be perceived to be incompetent. Intelligence is fragile often because we want to impress people with our brilliance, and yet the desire is confronted by glitches in our brain that worry that we're not going to, that we're going to confirm a stereotype about us or people like us, that we lack ability. Now, do you guys recognize this, gentlemen? It can happen to anyone. So this is an actor named John Lithgow, and somebody who I have a tremendous amount of respect for. And when I saw him in a hotel lobby in New York, I was checking out, he was checking in. I wanted to tell him and impress him with my knowledge of his acting, and I wanted to say just the right thing. And I had a PhD. I was a smart guy, then as now. And what came out of my mouth, however, was just the most like, I like your stuff, man. It was horrible. I just like, did I say that? We are capable of incredible stupidity. And this is one of the instances where I want to look smart. I meet this guy. And what was great is that this is pretty much the look that he looked at me with. I chose that picture carefully because it was sort of a mixture of concern and compassion, maybe empathy, or maybe a little bit like, I thought this was a good hotel. I didn't expect to like have to share it with people like this. And it's a humiliating moment for me because I wanted him to know, you know, like, I'm a worthwhile guy, but it was awful. My intelligence was not working. Now, we've studied this phenomenon, not with John Lithgow, but with students who are confronted by the fear of what we call stereotype threat or identity threat. And this is one of the classic, no, this is not that study. This is a study, of even more famous study on social exclusion. Social exclusion, a child being rejected by other people. A person being rejected by other people. I wanted John Lithgow to like me, and my fear of him not got in the way of my intelligence. In this study, on the left-hand side, those are IQ test scores. The blue bar is how many you tried, and the green bar is how many you solved correctly. And what's striking is that everybody was in the same situation except for one thing. The people on the left-hand side of the graph were told that one day people might not like you. Made them stupid and unmotivated. Just the whiff of rejection is enough to set off alarm bells in your brain. Evolutionarily, we care more about belonging than anything else because those who did not belong ended up as roadkill. You would be tossed out of the hunter-gatherer group you were in and left to fend for yourself. So all of us are endowed with this incredible need to get along. It hits its apex in middle school where other people's opinions of you matter more than anything else. Fitting in matters more. So belonging and intelligence go hand in hand. We can't think straight when we don't feel accepted. It's very hard. So
this was one of the most upsetting things I've seen in a school, and it happened all the time. I was I was going to one of these schools. I had heard there's a great program that makes kids better and smarter and happier, and I believe it. But they were just getting going with it. And I was watching them as they mounted this, and there was a girl in class, that sort of heavy-set African-American girl. The teacher asked the question, can somebody tell me the difference between a simile and a metaphor? Nobody wanted to answer that question. Nobody wanted to answer it. Finally, the heavy-set girl raised her hand, and she gave the most perfect answer you could imagine. And she was like 11, 12 years old, and I was sort of internally applauding for her and looking over to the teacher to see how she would sort of say, yeah, good. Then a fellow student said, oh, shut up, gorilla. And you saw the face of the heavy-set black girl go totally blank, and I sat in that class for 4 hours, and she was done, devastated. I went over to talk to her, wouldn't talk to me. This happens all the time, and the teacher did nothing about it, just went on with the lesson. This girl had just been literally stupefied, humiliated, and the smartest kid in the class became totally useless there, totally dead. And it happens all the time. So we know about this task. And what we're told is that children who have the endowed ability to wait will go on to have a better life. If they can wait 20 minutes for the 2 marshmallows, not only do they get double the marshmallows, but they'll get a higher SAT score. They'll do better in school. They'll marry a more beautiful woman and have children with high IQs, and it's just going to be great, and all you have to do is wait for the marshmallow. I have a colleague who teaches at Harvard, and he does experiments with little black kids, and he goes, I offer them $5 right now, I'll give you $5 right now, or I'll come back on Friday and I'll give you 100. He says, I can never get the kids to wait for the $100. What is wrong with them? Well, let me suggest to you through the experimentation that we know partly what's wrong is that they don't trust the environment. It's not the kid, it's that in the environment these kids know that $100 may not show up. In fact, Dad said he was going out for a pack of cigarettes, and that was 2 weeks ago. He hasn't come back. In this experiment, somebody makes the kid a little promise and then breaks it or keeps it before they do the marshmallow test. Adult says, I'm going to get some beautiful art supplies. You're going to love it. We're going to come back. We're going to paint together or do some great art. She comes back. It's late. She said, I couldn't find the art supplies, but here's some broken crayons over here. Let's have fun. So they do that. And then later, the kid does the marshmallow test. But in the other condition, the adult is reliable. They come back with the art supplies and they do the project. And then they looked at how long each kid would wait for the marshmallow. And it's not even close. When you can count on the adults around you, you wait a lot longer. And it makes so much sense. In many environments, the ones in which my little friend Jalen lives in, if you don't grab what's there while you can, it won't be there. You can't count on the environment. So this extends, this analysis, this context dependency. Psychologists say context is everything, and we just let that go. We just think, okay, context is everything. But think about our discussion of teacher quality. Do you guys recognize this person? Famous American teacher. His name is Jaime Escalante. Does that name ring a bell? I guess this is an American story. You all are Canadian. In the late 70s, our schooling system for minorities was hardly, it was about the same as it is now. In LA, this guy goes into one of the worst high school districts, and elevates the level of calculus performance in a way that was so high. So many of the kids took AP calculus from this ex-engineer who had all this talent and all this knowledge. He took these Latino kids, he's a Latino, he took these Latino kids, fired them up about algebra, calculus. They did so well on the AP calculus test that they were accused of cheating because how could Latinos do that well? They were forced to retake the test. They passed the test. This guy becomes a hero. They write a book about him called The Greatest Teacher in America. They make a movie out of his story called Stand and Deliver, which makes everybody go, okay, what did this guy do? How did he get these great results? And a lot of people try to replicate them. My favorite, most famous failed replication, because nobody was able to replicate it, was by this guy. He moved to a different school and couldn't repeat his own success. And we talk about teacher quality the same way we talk about intelligence, grit, self-control, that if you have it, you either have it or you don't have it. It doesn't change when you cross situations. And yet, the greatest teacher in America became just an average old teacher when he went to a different district. So for those of you out there, do me a favor. Next time somebody says, let's talk about teacher quality, tell them, let's talk about teacher support. What is the context for a teacher that enables them to be a great teacher all the time? He had it in one place, he didn't have it in the others. It's a complicated story. But the fact of the matter is, we think we can carve a score on a student's head, a teacher's ability to teach, and that they will be good in any context we put them in. Don't believe it. If it changed for him, if he failed, anyone can fail. All right, then there's identity threat. The fear that your performance or behavior will confirm a negative stereotype about your group or yourself as an individual. All of us experience this. When I was a Jewish guy in Texas, then as now, I was Jewish, they didn't know many Jews there. And so they would often talk in terms of stereotypes. A realtor once asked me, why are you Jews so rich? I was making, I think, $30,000 when she asked me that question, $30,000 a year, which then as now was peanuts. I was like working like one of those rats for peanuts. So I said, wow, that stereotype really doesn't apply to me, and let me tell you a little bit about stereotyping. By the way, what do you mean? And she goes, well, the few Jews I've met always want the big houses and the 3-car garages and the nice school, private school for their kids. And then she asked me if Jews have something genetic that makes them good with money. And then I said, okay, time out. There is no money gene. And I gave her a little lecture, anti-prejudice lecture, and she said, oh, I get it, I get it. So I don't know a lot of Jews, so I'm misapplying my stereotype to all the Jews I meet. I said, right, don't do it again. And she said, she was great student. But then a funny thing happened because we were at lunch, and it came time to pay for lunch. And I wondered, what is the correct etiquette here? Should I pay, or should I offer to pay for lunch, or does the realtor offer to pay for lunch? This was my first house buying experience. And I thought, well, I'm going to default to my nice guy position, and I'm going to offer to pay for lunch. And then it hit me. After that little lecture, if I whip out my money, I am going to confirm that stereotype that I just worked so hard to debunk. This is all in my head now. I'm not saying this out loud. And so I thought to myself, okay, I am not going to pay for lunch and confirm that stereotype. And then it hit me that there's another stereotype about Jews. And I'm like stuck. Pay for lunch and be a greedy Jew, or pay for lunch and be a stingy Jew? Now, that was not a bad predicament for me to be in, but it was a distracting one. So, because there was a really important conversation going on around me about houses, and I had missed every bit of it, being in this little Woody Allen zone that I was in. Sort of Hamlet. Now, this is precisely the predicament that many students face when we ask them to perform for us. A black student in America is accused by stereotypes of lacking intelligence relative to wives. A girl in mathematics, you heard Lise Elliott's talk, is considered less well endowed with mathematics than boys. So when she takes a math test and she's thinking about the stereotype, that could be problematic. A Latino kid in the United States. So there's a lot of groups that have a reputation that make academic achievement a little bit more prickly, a little bit more problematic. And what we find is that when we tell people that we're measuring their ability, African Americans, as shown in the left-hand side of the graph, do less well on the same test than if we don't. So we can move their intelligence around by changing the psychological environment that they're in. I'm measuring your intelligence, uh-oh, stereotype threat, lower performance. And this can happen to anyone. And as proof, I went to the highest performing students I could find. It turned out they were nearby at Stanford in the engineering department. Really smart people, perfect scores on their SAT scores. When I said you're going to take a math test, you could see a smile on their face because God, in their mind, had created them, put them on earth to do high-level mathematics. And so we gave them this really tough test that I couldn't even begin to understand, but I had a math graduate student cook it up for me. And then, so in one condition, we told them we were interested in seeing who's smart at math. We got the smile. The other condition, we said that plus, and you might want to know that we're probably going to compare your scores to that of Asian students in this study, and we're interested in why Asians are so good at math. That erased a full standard deviation of mathematics intelligence from these people whom God put on earth to do math. So if it can happen to them, it can happen to anyone. It's not a question of how smart you are, it's a question of how much you care about people's opinions and about how much you care about doing well. The more you care about doing well, the more anxious you will get when you're asked to perform under stereotype threat or identity threat. This leads us to a very important question. What do these four gentlemen have in common? They're all famous. You may recognize Barack Obama, Neil deGrasse Tyson, George W. Bush, and John F. Kennedy. This fact blew my mind. All of them have IQs over 120, which makes people go, huh? Actually, George W. Bush's SAT verbal score is higher than Neil deGrasse Tyson's verbal score, which is super ironic because Neil deGrasse Tyson is so famous and well written that the SAT corporation that makes the test asked him if they could use his writings as material to put on the tests. So what is the difference between these people? They all have perfectly fine IQs. Well, one difference is George W. Bush didn't have an ounce of curiosity. Because curiosity goes out the window when you're afraid of looking dumb. And this is a guy who was afraid of looking dumb, so afraid of looking dumb that people that know him said, I know him in private and he's way smarter. Because when you're in public, you're like in the stereotype threat condition of an experiment. And imagine what that's like for somebody for whom, when he was elected, the British newspaper said, how can 200 million Americans be so stupid electing this idiot? Imagine what that feels like, however you feel about George W. Bush. Obviously, we know now it could be worse. It's amazing how some bad people can start looking good if you just have the right comparison. But think about that, conditional stupidity. I had this in graduate school. I'd feel stupid one minute and smart the next because the conditions changed. I'd walk into my advisor's office and 10 IQ points would be sucked right out of my head because he was like John Lithgow to me. So here's the take-home point. When we measure everything from teacher quality to performance to self-control to whatever it is we would measure with George W. Bush, I guess how often he finishes a sentence correctly or something, we're not just measuring what's inside the person, we're measuring really effectively, and I think this point was made in a lot of the talks, we're measuring what the child or the person is inside of, the context. And that's important because we can change contexts. And so now I'm going to tell you about contexts that will make you happy, where children get smarter grittier, happier, and nicer. Now, when we evaluate people or groups, we evaluate them often along two dimensions, warmth and competence. Is this person friendly or hostile? Are they warm or cold? And are they good at what they do? Can I benefit from knowing them? Because we're all about resources and connections and meaning from our days as hunter-gatherers. So if you think of, so my tactic in this was I stumbled into a school that I couldn't believe how good it was. And then I said, what is it about this school that's making it both so warm and so effective? And are those two things related? I only want to send my kid to a school that's warm and effective. So what should I do to make it so? So I've done a deep dive into schools that are both warm and effective. No, just think about the difference between environments that are warm and effective. So I was just at the Apple store earlier because like a stupid idiot, I forgot one of my cords. So I went into the Apple store and it was so packed. And everybody in the store was happy. And everybody you would ask for help was glad to give you help. And everybody you asked knows all about the products and are very happy with the products. And because everything is so warm and inviting, you're willing to pay way more than you should for an Apple product. It's true. There's a place that sells clothes at a 300% markup in my community. Rich people buy their clothes there. They know they could get them anywhere else for $300, $400 less. But they give you M&Ms when you're in there, and they give you a free Coke. And the guy who owns the store will come over and talk to you. And he wrote a book about his amazing success, and it was called Hug Your Customer. Basically, when you make people feel really good and important and special, you can pick their pocket much easier. But you could also teach them much better. And that's the lesson of these places. There are schools in this country that think they're doing right by children, that want to do right by children, but they're cold and ineffective. And this is where I find so many of the children. Think about a place that's cold and ineffective. I don't know if it's true in Canada, but in America, it's this place. This is the Department of Motor Vehicles. And nobody wants to be there. Even the guy who's running the whole show does not want to be there. You stand in line for an hour and a half, and then you find out you were in the wrong line, and nobody cares. You're just going to have to stand in the other line. That's cold and ineffective. Nobody cares. And I'd say 90% of the children that I look at, that I work with, African-American kids on their way to prison, go to schools that feel like the Department of Motor Vehicles. That is a crime. So let's go to the bright side. Warm and effective. I found a school in the most unlikely of ways. So I'm a social psychologist. I've invented things like Stereotype Threat and growth mindset. And at one point, I couldn't work in my lab, that my research had to be shut down for a while. It was terrible, but it gave me time to leave my lab. And I can tell you that that was the best thing that ever happened to me. The United States Department of Education said, would you please, can we send you around the country to these little towns where you will tell people about your research? So I went them to tell them all my wisdom, all my great wisdom about how to educate their kids. And for the most part, I work with African-American children. And so they were sending me to places where they had never seen an African-American child, like the middle of Trump country in Pennsylvania, the sticks, we call it. And so can you imagine like giving a talk on the roots of empathy, like, I don't know, in a place where they think empathy is totally stupid? I just felt like, okay, I'm going to get through this talk, and then I'm going to get in my car, and I'm going to go away. But there was a lady in the back who was nodding at everything I said. And I go, huh, that's interesting. And after the talk, I said, I noticed you nodding. What was going on? She goes, oh, all that stuff. Every one of those things. I do all of that in my school. And I go, really? I thought I had just invented this stuff. And so here's a big lesson in empathy in one of the big lessons I've learned. I asked the question that I had been totally marinating in for so long. I said, how are your test scores? And I'll never forget the way she looked at me, like disappointed in me as a human being. And then she said, they're pretty good, but they ain't nearly the best thing about us. And I took that in. At that moment, that was the moment that changed my brain in this kind of way, because somebody who was telling me, I use your stuff, and I was completely coming out of ego. I wanted to know that my stuff was raising test scores. Maybe I can make some money on it. Maybe I could write a book about it. Maybe I could be important now. And so I was really moved by her response. It really stuck with me. And so I went down and checked out the school. School is near the Maryland, West Virginia border. Most of the children live below the poverty line. A lot of them don't have running water in their family. It was a little bit like that trip that Bobby Kennedy took down to Appalachia, where it just turned him into a lover of children and a hater of poverty. But I went to this school and I met these children, and some of them like smelled bad because they hadn't had a bath in a while. And yet I went there to see how the test scores really were. You want to see how they were? They were amazing. When they had been at the level of 0 when they got this new principal that told me that their test scores weren't nearly the best thing about them. When she came in 2003, none of the 150 kids that went to this forlorn little school could even pass the test. 4 years later, in 2007, all of the kids were passing the test, and 60% were passing at advanced levels. How does that happen? Was that cheating? I hung around for a long time because I suspected maybe there's a little cheating, and after a while, I didn't care. The emotions that I was treated to by being around these children, they work hard, they play, they support each other, and they're the nicest voices I've ever heard coming out of children. And it cannot be that I just stumbled upon this community of magically great, smart kids. Something happened to make them smart. Because right before she came, there was a school shooting. One of the bad kids at this school took their daddy's hunting rifle and shot up a school bus full of kids. Didn't kill anyone. But that was the kind of area. At Crellin Elementary, if something bad happened in the environment, they'd go, it's probably one of those Crellin kids. Their name of their school was like a slur. So this is totally remarkable. In fact, if you see this in the literature, you better suspect cheating, because it almost never happens. What's their secret to this? Their secret was doing a lot of the things that I did, but it was deeper than that. They said, we get to know each child as an individual, find out what he or she needs, and then we do our best to give it to them. That sounds really easy. It's really hard. It takes a lot of work, but empathy is a great teacher. When you know about children, when you know what their home looks like, and this principal, this lovely person, has been in every child's home. She took me on a tour. She'd go, this is little Johnny's house. Remember, he sat on your lap. And this is the house of the boy who brought you coffee. Every kid is like an object of fascination to this principal and to the people that teach in the school. Human beings are endowed with 5 core social motives. If you frustrate them, learning does not happen. So we've talked a lot about needing to belong. Trusting goes along with safety. Do you trust the people around you? Do you trust the environment? Mattering, and not just mattering, I like you. Being able to matter right now. Understanding, why are we doing this thing that we're doing? Let me quickly talk about habits of elevating schools. 10 minutes now? 5? Okay. There's a focus on belonging. There's an open love and familiarity for children that I have never seen anywhere else. just unabashedly affectionate with children. They model things. You've heard it here today. Human beings are the most imitative creature that have ever existed. As soon as a child is born, it begins to imitate the faces around it. That's with its mirror neurons, I think. And yet, when we teach kids, we don't model to them what we want to see. We tell them what we want to see. We're very ineffective that way. And yet, when you model kindness, children become kind. When you model happiness, children become happier. When you model resilience, growth mindset, all of that stuff needs to be shown, not talked about. In fact, the more you talk about it, I think the worse it is. The group needs a positive identity. I think I'm going to need a couple extra minutes. Calming rituals. I've mentioned meditation before. I'm seeing that meditation is making its way into schools. I'm going to hang out where it's happening. It's blowing my mind. Animals. You saw today how great rats can be. I think it's time we stopped segregating humans and animals. We need each other. Animals need us, we need them. We can learn together. Age mixing. We segregate kids by age. That's one of the reasons we think they're crappy. Bullying. I know that bullying is a big part of Roots of Empathy, but I go to schools where there's zero bullying. They don't need an intervention. You know why? Because not everyone's the same age. When you segregate by age, you're inviting bullying. You're saying you're all the same. So prove to me who's dominant. When you have little kids and big kids in the same place, you see a very different nature come out of these humans. You see a nurturing instinct rather than a dominant instinct. You see little kids looking up to big kids going, what can you teach me? And you see big kids feeling proud of what they can teach these kids. It's beautiful. There's a lot of this going. This is one of the reasons I was so excited about being invited here, is that age mixing, I'm finding in my own work, is not only important, it's critical. People are on their best behavior when you got old people in the room and young people in the room. And we evolved that way. Of course it's better. This is how we learned to be in groups. It is so artificial to segregate by age and other things, species even. And then what I call four-dimensional work. This is what brings all of these other things together. Four-dimensional work. It's just a fancy name for work that has a service component to it. Okay. I want to just let you know that this is almost the entire faculty at this great school, and what they're doing now is vital to their success. They're sitting around drinking wine and talking about the kids as though they're a hobby. This is where information gets exchanged, and the fact that they do this, and it's not a job, it's a blurred version of play, socializing, and schooling. And it's one of the greatest things because their trust and their bonds together are reflected in the kids' test scores. If you measure if you want to predict how well the kids are doing, one of the great predictors is how much the adults trust each other. And if you improve the trust among the adults, the kids' test scores will rise. We're very environmental creatures. Public displays of affection. This boy in the lap of this teacher, first grade, could not speak for 3 months. He was traumatized. The teacher realized that if she took him on his lap during lessons, on her lap, that he started to relax. And after a while being on her lap, he started talking again after 3 months. This is against the law in America. To touch, to hold, to comfort a student, it's exactly what the kid needed, and it's against the law. Is it against the law here in Toronto to hug a kid in school? I'm moving here. One of the most beautiful things is I saw this teacher in the first grade, on my first visit, I come into class, and remember, I know that this school has the highest test scores in the state, so I'm ready to see kids like working and grilling and stuff. For the first half hour, I watched as each child waited patiently at their desk for the teacher to make a pancake for each one and serve it to them. Has your first grade teacher ever make you a pancake? Did they ever feed you? Did they ever sustain you? Very important. And the kids were learning how to control and be patient. They were very hungry, but they're so grateful and so calm. Self-control is a muscle. My little kid, Jalen, is learning self-control through meditation, but most kids, because you grab and you're not waiting because your environment, there's a payoff for getting it now, you don't develop the muscle of self-control or delay of gratification. So by being in an unreliable environment, kids don't get good at self-regulating. It's not their fault. They're not getting the practice they need. One of my favorite parts of my job is I count hugs. So like, I'll sit in the back of the room, I'll just like, oh, there's another hug. Krellin kept me really busy. Krellin, 98 hugs in one day, I counted. This was the average of the 3 elementary schools in the same district, like 4 hugs. And it's not always easy to count hugs. Is that 1 hug or 8? This is the environment in the class. I was there for an hour and the kids were just hugging, and you could tell they needed affection, but that in this room, everybody belongs, everybody matters, everybody is cared for, even the goofy looking adults that show up to count hugs. Most of their time is not in the classroom. Most of the time, these kids spend their time making the world a better place. So they started by cleaning up their dump of a schoolyard, and they're always working cooperatively with other kids. They're always pulling together, so to speak. And they're always, if you ask them, why are you doing this? And they go, well, the school needs to, who's going to take care of the school? It's us, it's our school. It's their place. Choice and autonomy. Did you ever have your teacher and principal say, hey, what do you want to learn this year? Even the littlest kid gets asked. Why? Because you matter. Your opinion matters. And then they take what the kids want to learn and they find out a way to put it in the curriculum. It's very hard because every year is different. You can't repeat. But every year is exciting because you can't repeat. It's a great life at this school. Identity. This is the mental rotation that Lise Eliot was talking about. Okay, so your job is to take the one on the left and quickly match it to 2 on the right. And the answer is these 2. Now I can move on. What we find, and Lise is absolutely right, there's a correlation with testosterone. So like if I gave you a bunch of these items to solve, but beforehand I gave half of you an injection of testosterone, there would be an immediate effect on those who got the injection. You'd do better on this. You'd be a total jerk for a while too. You'd want to hit someone. Testosterone is not the best drug. We dosed up our students before they took one of those tests with psychology, identity. If you're a woman and you're reminded that you're a woman before you take a test, you do worse than if you're reminded you're a man. But what I learned from Krellin is that you need to give kids an identity that has nothing to do with their home, nothing to do with their performance. You have everything to do with their social bonds at school. So she gave these kids a new identity. And in our study, we showed that just thinking of yourself, we asked these kids in this study, tell us a couple of nice things about being a student at a highly selective liberal arts college. And that sort of primes them to think of themselves as bright and highly selective. And so the women do better. Interestingly, the men do best when you just say, you're a man. All right. We need role models. This is one of my favorite pictures because to build an identity, you need to know that people like you can succeed. Then you can identify, I'm a scholar now because people like me can succeed. So at Krellin, they role model for these kids, but they bring in outsiders that are like scientists and people that are exciting to these kids, so they go, oh, I want to be a scientist. That's how it works. And they're sometimes very explicit about the identity that they want these kids to embrace. And they do embrace it, and they're proud of it. Kids in my kids' school would think that this is totally corny. I will never wear that shirt, Dad. But at Krellin, they're just like, I love my school. They're so not cynical. Now, when you want to forge an identity for somebody that's achievement-oriented, and this is one of the most important things, identity is important. So, for example, it sort of shuts down thought. My daughter, if she ever wants to get a tattoo, will hear this from me. Jews don't get tattoos. That's it. And if I'll say it again, and it'll rhyme, that gives it more power. No tattoos for Jews. Jaime Escalante got his students to identify with mathematics by informing them something they didn't know about their social identity. They were Latino kids, and he said, so you don't know your own history, do you? Your ancestors invented mathematics. Now live up to your legacy. That's powerful stuff. Everybody wants to be part of a triumphant story, and at Krellin, to be a Krellin kid means that they're some part of something very special. Some place that went from low to high, and that keeps winning awards, and that when you hear the word Krellin now, it's not a slur, it's a badge of honor. All that happened in 4 years. And so I do this now with all my students. I get them to do good things, and I take pictures of them. When we see ourselves doing something in a picture, talking to a baby, being nice to someone, achieving something, it's more powerful than just doing the thing. Because now you see yourself the way other people see you. And if you saw these kids, you'd go, oh, those are nice kids. They're delivering food to the homeless. Those are nice kids. Those are smart kids. They're doing science. But we don't see ourselves that way. So you take a picture of these kids doing great things, and then you put those pictures up on the wall, and you attach it to Krellin kids, identity formation. That means when your identity is congruent with achievement, difficulty signals to you psychologically that you're having a meaningful experience. When your identity is incongruent with achievement, for example, in New York, African American students are not considered by sight to be the great scholars. So when your group identity is inconsistent with achievement, difficulty signals to you psychologically, hey, I may not belong here. It's a powerful difference, and it's all about identity. So creating an identity for these kids is really important. Age mixing. I'd like you to meet the newest member of my research lab. Her name is Zahara, and she's 5 years old, and she's a meditation teacher. My lab teaches inner city kids how to meditate. And one of the beautiful things about age mixing is this kid, I don't know him, only from the back of his head, but I know lots of kids like this. And when adults try to bring new ideas to them, they often push them away. Roll their eyes. This is stupid. No one will ever say this is stupid to this child. And they will never say it to her. They will open the doors because empathy comes along with young people. So she's the youngest member of my lab, and the oldest member is 65 years old, and I have people all the way in between. And when you bring this mentoring chain into a setting, it immediately calms people down. Because we're not a classroom full of kids anymore. We're a community. Powerful. Okay. I want to give you, you've heard about the growth mindset. This is when you teach people that they can get smarter, they actually get smarter. They work harder, they endure, they persevere, and they are less stressed out. In schools across America, you will find growth mindset curricula, and I'm not a fan. I've had it explained to me by teachers of my kids who didn't know that I created, and I'll go, oh my God. It's gone through this translation mill that has ruined it, stripped it of its power. The most ultimate growth mindset is to look at your child in your classroom and I do this now because I've learned from the master, Dana Macaulay, that you don't think about them, how they're going to do on the test tomorrow or the next day. You're thinking, how will this benefit you 10 years from now? That changes everything. The long view changes everything. These are Krellin students grown up. And Krellin kids go on to high school where they're totally underrepresented because it's a small school, but they're totally overrepresented in the awards that they win later on, how curious they are, how represented they are in the AP calculus classes. And the relationship never ends. She goes and visits them when it's at high school. I got to meet these students several years earlier. They would have been the little toddlers. Now, people need to matter. Often they need to matter more than they want to live. People from all countries or teenagers are signing up for ISIS. ISIS. Why? Because they leave lives that don't allow them to be significant. And this is such a deep motive. In schools, we tell kids, work hard for the next 10, 15 years, then you get to matter. And if we understood how their brains work, we'd realize that you might as well say that to your dog. If all kids function like that, everyone would floss. And no kid flosses. So, they give kids the ability to matter, and they do it by having relationships with animals, with nature. When you come to Krellin as a little kid, they plant a tree and there's a ceremony. When you graduate, they dig the tree up and they plant it in the town center. How symbolic that is. We've raised you this far. Now it's your turn to go beautify the community. Incredible. They matter in so many ways. Also, stressed out kids at Krellin can go pick up a chicken anytime, and it's very calming. Very calming to have a chicken. There are traumatized kids that I met there that wouldn't talk, but if you're both petting a sheep, they will open up to you. We have to stop segregating kids from animals. Really good for them. Okay, I'm going to talk about four-dimensional work, and that's it. I'm out. I love what I refer to as the elegant solution. A chef opens up a refrigerator and finds weird array of ingredients and somehow manages to bring them all together into something amazing. That's what great schools do, like this. And what they do is they have all these social needs for kids, mattering, belonging, so they figure out, how do we satisfy those? They create four-dimensional work. Now, four-dimensional work has to be contrasted with two-dimensional work. This is the work that made my son convinced that he never wanted to go to school again. It's awful. It's work. They don't explain why you should want to do it, and they put a koala on it to make you a little less miserable while you're doing it. Sometimes you get to play with manipulatives or three dimensions. At the Waldorf school, they build perfect models in mathematics class of a suspension bridge, and they're beautiful. And you have to get the math right. And I applaud them for the three-dimensional work, because a kid who can do that with math really gets it. They really understand the deep structure of math if you can use math to make something. Four-dimensional work would be if you actually made a real bridge that actual people would benefit from having. It's the fourth dimension, which is the social dimension. So I've been just a delighted witness to all kinds of four-dimensional work lately. And this girl is giving a cat an eye exam, working with a vet, and everyone's happy, except maybe the cat. A little bit, get that light out of my eye. These kids are beautifying the school. These kids are helping out, and they do this stuff like twice a week at an old folks' home in the area, giving food and then cleaning up the tables. These kids are servants of the community, and the community loves these children and wants to protect them. My favorite project, one of my favorites, is the chickens. Always comes back to the chickens. These kids raise eggs. Chickens lay the eggs, they take care of the barn, and second graders are in charge of the mathematics around it. You've got to know how many eggs you need to sell in order to buy enough feed to feed the chickens, not only now, but through the winter. That's important. And if you don't get it right, chickens are going to go hungry. There's going to be a glitch. So kids are careful with this stuff because they love the chickens and they don't want the chickens. And then you go to the first grade class and they're making snacks for the chickens for the winter. Everybody's involved at some different level. But the thing that I love is that they have to figure in how many eggs are left over to bring to hungry people in the community so that their work and their lives mean something right now, not only to the chicken and to the school, but to hungry people in the community. And the community loves them back and feeds the school, which turns around and feeds the community, and you get this incredible recursive spiral to where the point now where this forlorn school that couldn't pass the test, none of the kids could pass the test, now people are moving in, wealthy people, to the community because they want to be part of this. So it's the untapped resource that I think is my contribution to this, is noticing that in schools that do this stuff, they produce an emotional climate that makes you want to be there. It's the opposite of disgust. It's called moral elevation, and it's one of the nicest emotions that we have ever had. Thomas Jefferson described it as a warm feeling in the chest that you feel when you see acts of moral beauty. And when you witness those acts, you not only feel good about humanity, you want to contribute to humanity. So you'll see like the last scene of It's a Wonderful Life, where Jimmy Stewart's neighbors are helping him out, and your heart is swelling. If you see that movie and somebody asks you for a donation, you'll give way more money than if you had seen some other movie. If you watch Oprah, as they do in my experiments, where we elevate people, we watch acts of kindness delivered through Oprah, people are much more likely to say yes to an awful request, which is to be in an other social psychology experiment for free. They're much more likely to do that if they've been morally elevated. And this can work for Black children in New Haven. This is a kid who's learning how to do high-level mathematics because he's about to install a solar system on the roof of a house in his community. Before that, he was on his way to prison because he saw no point to school. Now he's doing four-dimensional work, and he's an absolute delight. These are my students. And I have to point out this kid in the middle because while we were making sandwiches for the homeless people in the area, this is my adolescent development class, my students' four-dimensional project is to mentor a kid who's doing good works in the environment. And this kid, while we were making sandwiches for homeless people, was going, oh, it's so stupid, so dumb. I can't believe we have to do this. And they're like drawing pictures on the bags with hopeful messages, hang in there, homeless guy, enjoy your sandwich. Then we get to the place, and a lot of school programs, they'll have kids make the sandwiches and then they'll take the sandwiches away and that's the end of it. That's called service learning in a lot of places. But then I said, let's go deliver the sandwiches. And this boy, so there's a guy thanking him. He said, thank you so much for making the sandwiches. And then he asked the kid who thought it was all bullshit, he goes, why do you do this? Why are you doing this? And the kid sort of stands up straight, shakes the guy's hand, and goes, we believe that serving the community is very important. I was like, where did you come from? Where he came from was that when you finish the transaction with another human being, it changes you. Community service can be a great thing, but if it's done incompletely, it's a waste of time. 100 hours of public service is every bit as effective as 10 hours with reflection. 10 hours of public community service with reflection is as good as 100 hours with no reflection. It's even better. Because when people think about what they do, they revise their self-concept to say, I am a person who does works like this. Do good and be good. All right, I have to end with this because there are some schools that are so horrible that we don't know what to do, but we're finally figuring it out. In this school, these kids, almost every one of them, it's in San Francisco, and it's in a beautiful part of San Francisco that's also horrifying. Gunshots at night, gang members, every one of these kids knows somebody who's been shot or killed, and they were doing terribly. This is a middle school. But David Lynch came along and offered them free meditation lessons. They meditate 10 minutes in the morning, 10 minutes in the afternoon. And I saw these results from the program, and I believed it was not true. So this school almost eliminated all its problems with meditation. So I went there to check it out because, again, wow, I've never seen anything like these effects in a school. There's all kinds of programs for reducing fighting and stuff like that, but they don't even come close to this. So I went and checked it out, and I saw even more benefits than I had seen in the results. Kids exhibiting self-control. The relationship looked really good, lots more empathy, and reduced fear of missing out. Kids hate missing out. Meditating kids don't worry about it so much. They're happy with where they are. So I'll end by talking about some of the things that we're doing now, which is to take the magic of a place like Krellin and bring it to New York City. Hard to do. There's no sheep, there's no chickens, there's no stream in the back to clean up. The kids don't live near their school. But that feeling of elevation is possible anywhere. It's possible anywhere because it's about the way things that people do together. And so this is a principal that taught her kids how to meditate, and her school has pockets of elevation in it. Everywhere they're meditating in the school, teachers are given a choice. You can walk into the class and be elevated by children and the way they talk to each other. Then you'll go to the classroom next door and you'll see people angry. Amazing difference. And for me, the next step is using elevating environments to bring children of different backgrounds together because we need to learn to get along with each other. And I have witnessed, these kids are among them, kids of every nationality, big group, diverse. And I remember after just having my mind blown at how great they are with each other, thinking Martin Luther King should have seen this. This goes beyond his dream. We've been measuring happiness of these children. I put in an 11-week program of meditation, just like 15 minutes a day. And these kids went from sort of happy, there was a dip in their happiness because there was a school shooting threatened. That week, you see the dip, this is their happiness. Then this is like 80 kids. From there on out, meditating once a day, they're just ecstatic. And I've met with them, and they're so over and over again, I'm seeing that kids getting silent, quiet is the way to bring elevation anywhere. Okay, so I end with Aronson's first law. The secret to great schools is free labor. Having a lot of people willing to work for free, but you cannot get it when you are doing wrong by children. If you're yelling at them, if you're humiliating them the way they do in so many schools, you'll see people leave their kids there, but they don't want to be around to watch it happen. No free labor. In Krellin, every time I go back, there's more adults hanging around. They just want to be part of it. And so I'll end with that. When you do right by children, everyone wants to be involved. And so the way forward in education for me is the way to do right by children, which is up and to the right. That's the way forward towards elevation instead of mere education. Thank you so much for listening to me.